morning, everyone. Welcome to the sixth webinar of our six-part series, Leaders for Outdoor Equity. We'll wait a few minutes as folks are coming into the room, and we'll start in about 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. Maybe as folks are entering into the room, please go ahead and drop your name, your pronouns, as well as where you're calling in from, as well in the chat box, so we can all get to know each other a little bit.
Oh, hi, Lesford. I don't want to disturb the meeting, but I had a lot of trouble with all the links that were sent. They wouldn't. They seem to be dead links. The only link that worked that brought me here was from the calendar. I don't know if that's just a me issue or if that's something that's been happening. So just FYI.
Got you. Thanks for raising that. And I didn't see the speaker there, but we'll definitely go ahead and address that, make sure that everyone has the updated link. All right, well, good morning again, and welcome all to the sixth webinar of our six-part series, Leaders for Outdoor Equity. We're coming to the end of this amazing journey together, and I so appreciate all of you that have taken the time to join us, whether it's been, whether this is your first webinar or whether you've seen this webinar all the way through, or you've been participating asynchronously, following the YouTube links to these webinars. We want to say thank you for holding time and space and recognizing the importance of equity and access to the outdoors and alleviating a myriad of issues. And I'll recap some of the content that we discussed in the last webinar series. At this time, as folks are coming in, please take a moment to, if you haven't already, drop your name, your organization, and where you're calling in from, as well as your preferred pronouns as well, into the chat box so we can get to know each other. And then if you haven't, as I mentioned, if you haven't had a chance to join us for the first 5 webinars that we've been a part of, Michelle will be dropping into the chat the links to modules 1 through 5 so that you'll be able to check those out. We encourage you not only to maybe look back through and kind of refresh on some of those conversations, but also feel free to share those links out across your agency, your organization, your network as well, and allow those conversations to be a great springboard for deeper conversation, self-reflection within your organizations as well. So I'll pause and give us a moment as folks are dropping names and locations into the chat box, maybe copying down some of those links. So today's session will focus specifically on, as our final session, today's session will focus on taking values-based action for outdoor equity. So we've learned about the importance. We started off and intentionally arced the series to talk about some of the history of public lands, how that came to be, to talk about some of the physical and functional barriers to access that exist that we discussed in module 2 and 3. In module 4, we talked about climate change and environmental justice issues. And then in module 5, we talked about health, the transformative power of the outdoors and improving the health and well-being of communities. And today we want to leave you with some tangible steps to be able to take values-based action for outdoor equity. And so just as a quick kind of icebreaker warm-up activity, we wanted to pose a question: what is one outdoor activity that inspires you personally to act on behalf of the outdoors? And so Michelle will be dropping a link, or has dropped a link into the chat box with a word cloud that everyone can participate in. So I'm seeing scuba diving, kayaking. Kayaking is one of my personal favorites. Hiking, running, also one of my favorites. Just experiencing nature, gardening. I'm loving the diversity of activities as well. The recognition that outdoor access and being in the outdoors can be from just stepping outside of your door and gardening, either in your own garden or in a community garden, to recreating in further away nature as well. So I'll give another few more moments for folks to enter in. Excellent. All right, well, by way of introduction, for those of you that might not know me, that may not have been on previous sessions, my name is Duncan. I'm the Senior Director of Programs at Outdoor Outreach. And we've had the wonderful opportunity to partner with Thrive Outside San Diego, the San Diego Foundation, the nonprofit institute at USD and US Fish and Wildlife Service to put together this webinar series for you. And the purpose of the Leaders for Outdoor Equity series is to give land managers, recreational leaders, public agencies, nonprofits, and outdoor industry an opportunity to learn about the vital role that outdoor access and public lands have in our health, our well-being, and in our quality of life. And it's also meant to deepen our understanding and leadership skills around issues of race and equity as they relate to the outdoors. And so it's with this in mind that I want to take a moment to acknowledge our communities here in San Diego, and that we sit on the ancestral homelands of the Kumeyaay people. And so that indebts us to equity in a very unique way. In not only acknowledging, but also integrating, as we've done on previous webinars as well, and integrating traditional Kumeyaay knowledge into our practices and into our engagement in recreating, as well as in managing public lands, or being in community with public lands, as Dr. Sten Rodriguez had shared also in the last webinar. So we extend our respect and our gratitude to the Kumeyaay people who've lived here since time immemorial. During our previous webinar, so as I mentioned in Module 5, we talked about the power of the outdoors in improving health and well-being. And by doing so, we talked about how lack of access to the outdoors really is a public health issue. It's deeply integrated. We heard first from Dr. Stan Rodriguez from the Santa Isabel, Kumeyaay Santa Isabel band of Lipe Nation, who provided a Kumeyaay perspective on nature as medicine. He kind of gave an overview of traditional medicine and how we need to be in relationship with our land and our water, and how the health of each are intertwined. And then Dr. Machine Razani from UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital provided our keynote, adding some additional science around nature as healer, and bringing out some research that only really reinforces some of the indigenous knowledge that we already have around how nature can heal. She spoke a little bit about her practice in prescribing nature and her vision forward of integrating nature as a part of public health practices. Next, we had the California Natural Resources Agency Undersecretary Angela Barranco share a little bit about the agency's latest state policy initiative, the Outdoors for All initiative, which very much takes a focus on health, the health and well-being of communities as we look to expand outdoor access, and also as we work towards achieving conserving 30% of our lands by 2030, and some of the regional challenges that are related to human health and natural resources. Next, we had Ale Ricardes from Blue Shield of California share from a health provider's perspective, a health insurer's perspective, the importance of outdoor recreation and improving the health of communities, and Blue Shield's commitment to doing just that. And then last but not least, we had our very own from Outdoor Outreach, Lexis Morrow, join and share a bit about her personal story of how the outdoors has helped improve her health and well-being, and how in turn, through participating in our leadership program and then joining on staff, she has also helped to create similar experiences for hundreds of youth over the past several years, and continues to do so. So now, as leaders in the environmental and outdoor sectors, we really encourage you to rethink through this session and further on. And we hope to maintain this community, to remain in touch with many of you as we do the work of rethinking what the outdoors represents to all residents of this country, and who are the experts in stewarding natural resources, who are the people, who are those that we should lean to for that knowledge. And then last but not least, how can we all together remove barriers and create a more inclusive and equitable outdoors? And so today's webinar will pick up on the theme that was touched on in previous modules, taking values-based action for outdoor equity. As always, we encourage you to sit with and reflect on the insights and perspectives offered by each of our speakers today, because each of you are going to be a part of what happens next. So now, with further ado, I'd like to turn the session over to Emily Young, Executive Director of the Nonprofit Institute at the University of San Diego. And Emily will be facilitating the conversation amongst our speakers today. Emily, take it away.
Thank you, Les, and good morning, everyone. I'm just so excited to see you all today. And thank you so much, Les, for really setting the tone. I noticed that there was somebody in the chat that mentioned trouble with audio. Please let us know if anybody else is having any trouble. We have not detected it on our end. With that in mind, I just wanted to start today's session by getting your initial reflections on values-based action for outdoor equity. And as we've gone through these webinars, and some of you have gone through the leadership cohort, what we've also been looking to do is really help create that, that awareness, as well as help us individually and collectively develop an attitude to support outdoor equity that can be translated then into both individual and collective action, changes in behaviors. And we're all part of what happens next. And so with that in mind, I wanted to ask you to share just a few words in the chat. When you think about values-based action for outdoor equity, what comes to mind for you? Just a few words. When you think about values-based action for outdoor equity within your organization, within yourself, what comes to mind for you? Intention, integrity, access to nature, inclusion and integrity, heart, justice. Oh, these are great. Removing barriers, not focusing on conservation or restoration goals, empathy, decreasing barriers to access. Wow, these are great. And welcomed space, persistence, needs work, community voice. So many of these are really bringing in elements that haven't traditionally been thought of, perhaps in the context of conservation efforts or land management and public lands. But the whole element of being human and being in relation with one another and what that really means, and building a more inclusive community, and how that is directly tied with how we can be better stewards and be more inclusive in the outdoors. These are great. Thank you so much. Connecting to spirituality and indigenous lifeways, all of that. Well, thank you. This is great. Keep putting them in the chat. This is really for all of us to share with one another. And now I would like to just go over the format of today's session and introduce you to our phenomenal guest speakers. We have a wonderful group of advocates, agitators, and activists that work both in the nonprofit side of things and in the government side of things. And we also want to be in conversation with all of you. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to spend the first part of our session today in a roundtable conversation about advocacy and values-based action for outdoor equity. And so we'll hear from, again, leaders in both nonprofit and government organizations, government agencies, who'll share stories of how they've leaned into their roles, no matter what that role is, as well as the missions of their organizations, their institutions, their agencies, to advocate for projects, for programs, for public policies, and other kinds of measures. It can have something to do with personnel changes or trainings or what have you, to increase access, to promote inclusivity, to redress disparities and injustices, and lay the groundwork for transformational change in our system of local, state, and federal public lands, as well as more broadly, our system of access to the outdoors. We will then have a roundtable discussion, which will include questions from all of you. So please do post your questions in the chat as you're listening to the folks that we have with us today. And then Les and Michelle may chime in with questions from the chat to the group to complement anything that I'm doing here. But then after that conversation, we will take some time to step back and have you reflect. We'd like you to do some evaluation of these webinars, as well as, if you've participated in them, the leadership seminar. So we're going to take a break in the middle of the programming to have you do that so that we can really make sure to get your feedback. It's really vital to us because we hope to continue this programming. After the survey, we're going to bring in Dr. Zachary Green, who has worked with the people that are in the leadership cohort. And he is our Director of Leadership Development at the Nonprofit Institute here at the University of San Diego. And he's going to help all of you delve deeper into your roles as transformational leaders to advocate for more inclusive and equitable access to public lands and the great outdoors, followed by a final wrap up to this webinar series that we have so enjoyed being on with you. In addition to Dr. Green, our speakers today include Ben McCue Executive Director of Outdoor Outreach, Rachel Norton, Executive Director of California State Parks Foundation, Courtney Baltiskyy, Director of Advocacy and Strategic Partnership at the YMCA of San Diego County, Julie Gonzalez, Community Engagement Coordinator from Grand Teton National Park, and Chantel Jimenez from she's the Urban Refuge Coordinator from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And throughout today's program, we'd like you to think about where you see yourself as an advocate, as an activist, as an agitator, as a disruptor for outdoor equity. And think about what you can do from your role to be more of a leader and a change maker. And we invite you to use this time in this space as an opportunity for self-reflection, as well as an opportunity to learn together and find ways to broaden awareness, to shift attitudes, and ultimately advance positive change. Now, one last thing, we do have amazing speakers today, and we're not going to have time to give their bios, but they will be posted in the chat. So please take advantage of that. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who's going to share some reflections, initial reflections on what it's meant for him to really be an advocate or a troublemaker for outdoor equity. And that is Ben McCue with Outdoor Outreach. Ben?
Thanks so much, Emily. And thanks everyone for joining this session. It's been really great to see the development of the Leaders for Outdoor Equity. And I know this program is super important for all the work that we're trying to move forward today. So I can share a little bit about kind of my own experience from the lens of being a nonprofit leader and kind of being, thrust into that space as someone brand new. So I came on to Outdoor Outreach in 2013. I'd never been an executive director before, but I've had a lot of advocacy experience with my past job at Wild Coast, working on cross-border health and environmental issues in the Tijuana River watershed. And I had also taught a class actually at USD on advocacy for change. And so, when I came on at Outdoor Outreach, our mission was the same, to connect youth to the transformative power of the outdoors. But the way in which we did that was really through direct service, working with youth, picking them up, taking them on programs to nearby and further distant parks, and really kind of opening that door directly for them. But we'd never really engaged in addressing any of the systemic obstacles around outdoor access and meaningful outdoor access. And yet, when I came on, I heard so many stories from our youth about the life-changing impact that this outdoor engagement had for them, and how they felt like it meant meeting a critical community need for them, whether that was around mental health, physical health, kind of social, emotional connections with one another. And yet, many of them really felt like those in the larger community didn't really see that as a value. They saw it as a nice to have, and something as one of our program graduates and instructors I just shared. He said, outdoor engagement for my for my family, that was something for people that had too much money or too much time on their hands. And so really, when I came on at Outdoor Outreach, I saw the opportunity to create what we later named the Outdoor Voices program. And that was really a way for youth to use their experiences in the outdoors to help inform change, both in their community, internally at the organization, and then, meeting with key decision makers. And so I think some of the key highlights of that was just really working with youth so that they could really see the power of their own voice and their experience, and being able to provide for them, these platforms by which they could speak directly with decision makers. So whether that was going to Sacramento and LA for the Parks Forward Commission hearings, that was a part of the state parks efforts to really look at how to make the state parks department more relevant to Californians across the state, or being invited to to present to Interior Secretary Sally Jewell at the inauguration of the Urban Refuge program, which now has been so successful. And I remember specifically for that opportunity, we were invited to present. Only one of our participants could present. And so one of our participants, Vincent Culliver, really took it upon himself to meet with some of the other youth in the program and ask them what they would like him to share in that moment. And not only did he share in that moment kind of the value of meaningful outdoor engagement and kind of breaking down barriers to that engagement for youth and families across San Diego, but he also gave some key recommendations to the Interior Secretary for how they should look at delivering that program. So it would really speak to kind of the critical community needs that he saw from his own experience and from the experience of his peers. And I think in that moment, I really saw just the power of those outdoor voices to really inspire change. And so we created more opportunities for youth to step into those spaces. And also for them, that opportunity to be an advocate and to feel the power of not only speaking for themselves, but for speaking for all those other folks who didn't have that opportunity to have that platform. So I think it was a big weight, big responsibility for them, but they stepped up in huge ways. And we've continued that program. And you could see just from the last Leaders for Outdoor Equity session, Lexis presenting her story of impact and kind of her recommendations for how to further this work around outdoor equity. And specifically kind of going back to that nonprofit framework about why is advocacy important. I think there's a widespread myth that nonprofits really can't engage in lobbying or in advocacy. And so, for me coming into outdoor outreach, that was also the approach and the perspective of my board of directors. And so I had to do a lot of work with them to really get them to see that engaging in advocacy would help us to further our mission at the organization in ways that direct service couldn't do. And so it was really a way to magnify our impact. And also I had to come to the table and be like, and here are some key funders that I know will support this work. And here are the opportunities for our youth to use these experiences to help, continue to develop their own leadership skills. So thanks to my board, they really embraced that. And they said, all right, give it a shot. We're still not sure, but go for it. And so, today, I think we've really shown that is a really key piece of our work. And I believe it's something that's really important for every single nonprofit out there to not only be working on kind of the direct service, but also on the systems change piece and on the advocacy piece. So I'd be happy also to just, be able to answer any questions. I'm sure you all have a lot of questions, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Ben. That is really powerful. And I'm reminded how much one voice matters. And the fact that you don't have to be an executive director or a president or a congressperson or some other recognized community leader to have a voice. A young person that took the time to listen to his peers at Outdoor Outreach talk to the head of the interior in the United States to really shape public policy, and it made a difference. And then also, I think what was interesting, Ben, about what you said that we can circle back to at some point is the fact that within a nonprofit organization, part of what you have to navigate too is your board. And that's something to think about. How do you bring those people, key decision makers within your organization along, no matter where you are within that organization? So thanks for that. And now I'm going to pop over to one of our government agencies. We're going in first name alphabetical order, and it actually works out perfectly. So Chantel Jimenez from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would love to hear your story.
Thanks, Emily. And I think, sort of to build a little bit about what Ben was talking, I am a government employee and I am not able to do any advocacy or lobbying. So my role and what I see as my role when I think about outdoor equity and how I play into that and who I am in my story is I see sort of I'm that making change within. and really focusing on how I can be that individual in this bigger government service to start to push for people to look at things differently, to try things differently, to engage in a way that makes them uncomfortable, and just try to continually poke the bear, so to speak, to make change within the service, because you know, I'm not allowed to sort of go around and above and advocate and lobby and see resources come down to make the change. I'm able to have the conversations with the people who are doing the work in the field, developing the land management policies, looking at how we engage within the communities and not just on the federal lands, in a way that makes people uncomfortable, and starting to have conversations in which people generally are not familiar with and don't even know how to have. And so I'm like the inner mole. You know, Ben and the nonprofits can work on the outside, and they make big system change and advocate for change at the state and national level. And then I feel like my role is it's sort of like within the bacteria or the virus that is then growing within the Fish and Wildlife Service to make the change that isn't going to affect and also allow the, you know, I would say I'm like middle of my career. And so there's a lot of people coming up into my, you know, in the Fish and Wildlife Service that need the opportunity just to be able to have the conversations that I was not allowed to have or didn't feel comfortable having when I was in my early career. And so that is my role and my story with all of this, and where I see myself in terms of changing the dynamic for outdoor access and equity in the outdoors, and who comes to public lands, and who the Fish and Wildlife Services serves as the public. It is a very different public in which we are serving today compared to who we served 20 years ago.
Well, thank you, Chantel. That is really interesting. And it is, you know, when you think about an agency that's sprawling across every state in the country with millions of acres, and you being in the one of the first, I think the first urban refuge in the country, and really finding the ways that you could make change, and also a lot of first things that you were told you couldn't do, or you felt like there was a culture within the agency in which you couldn't do things, but you persevered and really focused on poking the bear. That's a great phrase to think about, and for, again, people to remember, no matter how bureaucratic the organization is where you work, or what the current culture is, there are always opportunities to kind of push the boundaries and push for kind of those uncomfortable conversations, and then be a leader for others to help them be able to have those conversations. So thank you for that, Chantel. So now we're going to go to you, Courtney Baltiskyy from the YMCA, and would love to hear you share your story.
Thanks, Emily. And Chantel, I hear you describe yourself as a mole and bacteria. I want everybody to know that Chantel is delightful and a phenomenal advocate, as are the other panelists here today and all 65 other members of this opportunity and this series. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, to learn from all of you and share a bit of the WISE perspective. I am a committed advocate for systems level change and alignment, for transformative experiences for children, youth, and families in San Diego, in our country, and globally. I've spent a number of years as a program director with the Y, and now I have the privilege of being our director of advocacy and partnership. So I've worked with a number of you all for a lot of years, learned a tremendous amount from you, and it's really given me the courage and the confidence to be more of an agitator within our own organization. I'm sure everybody is familiar with the YMCA. The Y in San Diego is one of the largest in the countries. And I think we've really had to reckon, especially during the pandemic, with the privilege we hold in being a larger agency. And I've really pushed our agency to recognize some of the paternalism in our systems to access the spaces that we're privileged to steward, like our resident camps, to recognize paternalism in the processes we have when it comes to scholarships and access. And when it comes to that value-based advocacy internally, again, I think I've found a new confidence in checking my gut every time there's decision-making to say, who does this benefit? Who's missing? And what can we do to be more inclusive in these opportunities? And we are embracing that change, and we are committing to more equitable access to our programs, to our brick and mortars, our resident camps in San Diego. One of the excellent opportunities that I've seen come to fruition with that newer aligned thinking is for one of our programs called Our Safe Place. Extremely proud of this program. It's a county funded program. And what they've been able to do in the last 5 years as an advocate and ally to LGBTQ youth. This program has an opportunity called Camp Trailblazer. That is a youth named program, but it brings LGBTQ youth to our resident camps for camping experiences. And the first weekend of Camp Trailblazers was up at YMCA Camp Marston prior to the pandemic. And that was the first time that a lot of these youth had been able to experience overnight camping opportunities. And when we talk about the transformational power of the outdoors, it's really this algorithm about, being with a trusted adult, being with an authentic peer group, and being in a space that gets you outside of your comfort zone. And for especially the youth who are trans who came to this opportunity, they're just finding new comfortability in their own bodies. So to then be in the outdoors and have that transformational opportunity was so critical. And in that weekend, we had one youth, we'll call them Jack, and Jack had actually been to Camp Marston as a child and had gone there every summer in their previous identity as a female. And right away when Jack got to Camp Marston for Trailblazers, they recognized a staff that they had worked with when they were younger. And Simon on our team welcomed Jack with open arms, and they both cried in the opportunity to just embrace Jack in their full identity and welcome them the same way they were welcomed early in their life, and just know that it's a safe, accessible space. Camp Trailblazers has also done sessions down at Camp Surf most recently, where youth who have recently gone through top surgery, bottom surgery can come and be in a safe space in newer bathing attire, have access to bathing attire, in opportunities that they never thought would be possible without this type of program. So it's just one example of a program that really came from a process of that gut checking and asking, who's benefiting and who's missing from these opportunities. So thanks so much for the opportunity to share a bit today.
What a really moving story. And, being a mother, that really moves me to think of Jack, if they were my child, how I would feel to have them be in a space where they really felt included and welcome, and among peers that cared, and adults, trusted adults that cared. And more broadly, it's really interesting what you talk about for some people on the call that might be in organizations that have a really long history. And within that history, obviously, comes also kind of the the structures of racism and privilege, and ways of approaching programming and communities that could benefit or were excluded from different kinds of projects and programs, and more broadly, just from our public lands. And to think about then the role within the context of the YMCA, I think very powerful examples. So thank you for that. That's great. Julie, you are next. So Julie Gonzalez from Grand Teton National Park. And I will say that Julie also helped us develop the foundation of the Leaders for Outdoor Equity program before, I won't say abandoned, but she did leave San Diego for Montana. But we're over it. None of us are bitter or angry about it. So with that, Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I would be offended if you weren't over it, because then it would mean it didn't matter. Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Julie Gonzalez. Pronouns she, her, ella, and I am currently working with the National Park Service and Grand Teton National Park as their community engagement coordinator. And it's really been a full circle journey for me to be back here and to be in this particular position. I essentially fell into outdoor equity work in conservation, specifically working with the federal government. In college, I took 2 different internships, one with the US Fish and Wildlife Service and one with the National Park Service, both which were geared towards bringing historically underrepresented youth into these internships that would expose them into these careers and provide an opportunity for them to learn more about the National Wildlife Refuge system and the National Park Service. And when you go into these programs, there's this overwhelming looming elephant in the room that you are in these programs because you identify as someone who is part of a historically underrepresented community, whether that's a person of color, LGBTQ, disability, et cetera. And that often gets used against you in a way where people within the organization say things like, "Oh, you were only hired because you're a brown person," and after a while, you start to believe that. And so I was really reluctant, and I fought against being identified as like the Mexican, the Latina, the person of color who was there to work. And I was like, I'm just here as an intern. I'm going to learn as much as possible. But towards the end of one of my internships, I had a conversation with my supervisor, and he straight up was like, "Hey, I just want you to know that the reason that I hired you, your resume looked very similar to the other person's resume, but the thing that stood out was that you spoke Spanish. And we're really trying to work with our migrant community." And at first it's like, it's a hard pill to swallow because you're like, oh, like this whole time I was like fighting it. And then to be told like, oh no, that's actually why, was hard. But he followed up with, yes, I hired you because of this. People are going to hire you because of this, but you are more than this. You came in here and you crushed this internship, and now you are, I think that you're in a great position to continue working as a ranger. And he gave me like this little pin that said ranger from when he worked in Yellowstone as a backcountry ranger. It was a very sentimental moment. And that really stuck with me, in that like, I could either see this identity, why am I crying? I could either see this identity that other people see me as a as something that is negative, or I could use it as a tool to get into the door, show them what I can do, and on top of that, be able to connect with community. And so I took it, I ran with it, and I went through this other internship program with the National Park Service. And with that particular experience, when you're in a space amongst other folks who are also BIPOC, and you're having these conversations, it's a space that I didn't have before, conversations that I never had before. And so realizing the strength of having affinity spaces where you can have that was really powerful. And when you're out and you're working with the communities, and they see you and they see your face, and they realize that you speak their language and you understand what it's like to be a daughter of a first generation immigrant, as a first generation, and parents are immigrants, and you can have those conversations. It's really powerful. And so I see my advocacy similar to Chantel. As a federal government employee, like, I can't do advocacy work in the like law and policy and that type of way, but I do have the ability to be a change agent. And with that, similar to the mole, I like the change agent because it's like an undercover agent. You're in these spaces, you're holding space, and the power that I bring, the way that I do advocacy, is through representation. So being that Latina, bringing in myself to work, having those conversations with the kids, talking about carne asadas, and but also bringing their voices into the room because we have that similar connection. So that's why I keep doing this work, even though sometimes it can be really challenging and frustrating, but just having that heart and knowing that if I'm here and I'm holding space, then that can also lead to creating more space for others. So my emphasis while I'm here I do a lot of education, field trips, play a lot of games with kids, but I also now, I mentioned this being full circle, now in my position, I have the ability to work with interns from that same program, NPS Academy, that I came through, now it was 6 years ago. And I'm now helping run and host and mentor these youth into these internships, and whether they go on and become continue to work in the conservation industry or with the federal government, that would be great. But if all they leave with is like, hey, this is really cool, there's people like me doing these things and being outside, then that's huge. So here I am holding space, creating space as a change agent. Thanks.
Wow, that is so much to unpack there, and really moving stories. Thank you so much. I did see in the chat, people were really loved the personal stories. And the thing I wanted to just kind of mention there that really struck me by what you're talking about is that, oftentimes we look at, one step we can take and that'll be enough. And so Julie, you were talking about, well, I got this internship. The whole idea was to create more pathways for really amazing BIPOC applicants to come into the National Park System, into the Fish and Wildlife Service, to really diversify these agencies where we know there's been a lot of research that Dr. Dorcita Taylor told us about, even in our first session, just showing just how homogenous those agencies have been historically and really white centered. And you also pointed out why that's not enough, which is really important. And so there's that first step and the things that you had to do. But what I thought was really interesting about what you said, Julie, was that even in your time there's been a shift, because now it's not somebody that doesn't look like you that's encouraging these other people to apply and mentoring them. They see you as a role model, and that's going to multiply. And so even though it can feel like this change is daunting, it's going to take forever to really make a difference. What we've heard from all of the stories today so far is that actually that is not true. It can take one voice, it can take one person, and we need to be impatient. And it's the urgency of now. We can't wait 50 years. We can do a lot now, and it's incumbent upon every single individual to do what they can do to find where they can make a difference. And don't just stop at one action, but it's really a continuum of efforts ongoing over time. And so thank you very much for that. And I love that change agent, a secret change agent. And so you and Chantel are secret change agents in two big, big agencies that are under a lot of change right now. Well, last but not least, I'd like to bring into this conversation Rachel Norton with California State Parks Foundation. And obviously, Rachel, you're also working with another big agency in California, the state parks system. So Rachel, I'd like you to take it from here.
Whew. Well, this is all, everybody, thank you, Emily. Everybody, you all are such tough acts to follow. And so much of what you all said resonates for me. And I was thinking as I was listening to all the presentations, like, how do I pull all these threads together? Because now that I knew I was last in the alphabet, I was going to go last. So I'll do my best. And I just want to say, Julie, I can tell why I completely see why all the San Diego folks are salty about you going to Montana. But I think you're going to do great things within the park system. And, I think as Emily highlighted, park agencies really need people with your experiences to connect more folks with these incredible resources that we have. And I think, that's where I started my journey as an executive director. Like Ben, I had a lot of experience in advocacy and politics and working within nonprofits. But this is my first job leading a nonprofit. And I've been in this role for it'll be about 4.5 years. And it has been an incredibly rewarding and incredibly challenging learning experience. Because one of the things, I think the difference in leading an organization versus pushing policy forward for an organization is that as the leader, you have to create the conditions. You can't do everything yourself, and you can't always be in all the rooms where you're doing your work, building every single relationship yourself. So you have to create the conditions for the staff to really create the change that you're trying to see in the world. And that takes it takes a lot of confidence, which, as a leader is earned through experience and not necessarily, at least for me, something that I started out with. So I want to tell you all a little bit of a story about a recent policy win that we're really, really excited about, that absolutely took a village, could not have been achieved without an external champion, without the partnership of a government agency, without really powerful voices on the ground, like the outdoor outreach participants. So, all of this kind of comes together there. So, this last June, the state of California in its budget created the California Adventure Pass, which is the sort of California version of the Every Kid Outdoors 4th grade pass that the National Park Service has done for since the Obama era. And we had been, when I came into this job, I knew that creating opportunities for more of California's youth to experience the state park system was the key to the future, because this organization, California State Parks Foundation, has been around for 50 years, and our mission has consistently been to protect and preserve the state park system. But over time, we have to rethink what that means. Somebody in the chat said, that values-based action comes from not focusing on conservation and restoration of lands. And that's a very powerful idea, because while these lands are incredibly precious and need to be conserved, and we need to steward these resources, it's not just about keeping them the way they are for the people who already use them. It's really about parks don't just happen. I like to say parks need the support and engagement and involvement of all of the people who are taxed and who are part of a society to use them. And so if we have large segments of our California population that don't see these places as being for them, as Ben said, the idea of people who have too much time or too much money, then in the future, we are not going to have residents in the state who are going to be willing to tax themselves to take care of these places, and that's what they depend on. So it's a very, it's a very tactical, at the end of the day, inclusion and access are incredibly important for the future of parks, but getting your head around that, as and getting your board's head around that has definitely been a process, because it's a shift. And so we started sort of with, as I said, this belief that we needed to make systemic change at the state level, to have programs that created opportunities for more youth in California, and particularly youth from historically underrepresented communities and under-resourced communities. That was absolutely the policy goal. But the question was, how to accomplish that? We were at that time, not in great financial shape as an organization. We had been through a really difficult period. I was fortunate that we had that our policy, our program and advocacy director, Holly Martinez, is truly a visionary. I'm speaking of her in the past tense because she's since left the organization and is now working at the Commission on the Status of Women for the state, which is a great next step for her. But Holly is a person who has tremendous vision and faith in her ability to make change. And so she said to me, we can go big. This is how we can do this. And I had to have the confidence to say, okay, we're going to invest in this. We're going to invest in a multi-year initiative to get youth to learn about what programs work, getting youth outside, and start to make the case to state parks and to the legislature that this is an important next step. And so we did. We made some really important investments, both in bringing some strategic communications to this, to really Holly hired some folks on her staff. We expanded her staff, and we started to kind of make this case in a very methodical way. And it was very scary for me as a leader, because I was being questioned by my board, by folks, even on other folks on the staff who were like, why are we spending all this money on this? This isn't, what are we getting for this? It was really a leap of faith. And what I'm, there were definitely some times where we thought I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. I mean, when the pandemic hit, suddenly the state budget was in terrible shape. It was not the time to advocate for a big new program. But it's kind of amazing how things happen when you take a leap of faith and you and you have that sort of essential knowledge of what I'm going for is the right thing. The pandemic hit, we thought we had to kind of pause and pivot and do some other things, but we had spent a lot of time engaging Jennifer Siebel-Newsome, the first partner, who was really interested in this idea. She's very, very interested in mental health with her own family and with herself. She really finds, access to nature to be incredibly important. So we had met with her. We had brought, actually Les came up and brought participants to meet with her to talk about, and the power of stories, right? Not me telling the first partner how great it is for youth to get outside, but actually creating situations where youth themselves could tell her what was important to them and what was transformational for them was really important. Anyway, she became the champion. And because of the pandemic, even though the budget we thought was in terrible shape, people suddenly were like, parks are the thing. Parks are where I want to spend my time. Parks are these incredible resources. And that created really the final bit of momentum for us to push this pilot, a 3-year pilot of the California Adventure Pass. I'll put a link to the state's program page in the chat for folks that want to learn more about it. It's not every park. It's 19 parks across the state, but 4th graders and their families in California can get free admission to those 19 parks for an entire year through this program. So it's really exciting. It's a huge policy win. It's a big expansion of kind of how the state of California uses its parks to support its people. And yet it could go away in 3 years. So the job now is really for advocates like California State Parks Foundation, for other, and there's many, many organizations that we worked in partnership with to push this forward. Now we've got to make the case to the legislature, to state parks, that the program needs to be made permanent and it needs to expand to more parks to increase access. So that, I guess, is sort of how I pull all those threads together as, really making sure that we are being authentic in terms of the voices that we're amplifying to make our advocacy case. And also as an organization leader, really understanding that it's my job to create the conditions for folks on my staff to push forward these big ideas and make them happen, and to have faith in both my vision and what I know, but also the vision of the people that are out doing the work in the field. So it's a big, exciting win, but it also was a huge learning experience for me as a new executive director. So I guess I'll stop there. That was a long story, but it just shows that it takes a village. It takes, working with government. It takes working with other organizations, and working with your board and your internal staff to really make true systemic change happen.
Well, thank you for that, Rachel. That's a great way to round out this conversation. And, full disclosure to this group, I sit on the board of California State Parks Foundation. And the board, I will say, because I'm on the board, I understand exactly what Rachel's talking about in terms of the barriers, some of the biggest barriers coming from the board itself. And I think too, for those of you out there that are in a senior leadership position, it's a really lonely job. Being an executive director can be a really lonely job. And there is, I think, pervasive in among many nonprofit organizations, a real scarcity mindset. And so it's not surprising when you're trying to do something different, even at the most difficult and challenging of times like this pandemic, the second guessing would set in. And yet it's those places where you take a leap of faith to try something different, because quite frankly, we all know that a lot of what we have been doing just isn't working. We're seeing falling use of different kinds of parks and open space. And we're seeing terrible wildfires and other major challenges in terms of the stewardship of our open space and natural lands. I think another thing I wanted to call out, what you were saying, Rachel, was the importance of centering youth voices and the voices of future generations. They're calling upon us. How are we going to be better ancestors to them? And really focusing on that 4th grade pass as a real opportunity to really lift that up. And ultimately getting help, when you take that leap of faith, you can get help from unexpected places. And I think that's something that you do see time and again. It doesn't take that much to put things over the line, but it can feel daunting. And so with all of that, I just wanted to kind of ask a follow-up question for all of you. And I know that we don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to ask some of you different questions just as another round robin. And I guess I'll go, I wanted to go with maybe looking at Julie and Chantel. If you could kind of speak to, the programs in your organizations now within the Fish and Wildlife Service and also the National Park Service that you think now have been most successful in engaging people with the outdoors, and what do you think are some of the critical success factors? Because I know it's part of each of your roles, and it would be helpful to kind of share what seems to be working. So Julie, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So thinking of this question, one program specifically comes to mind, and that's Pura Vida. We here in Grand Teton, our closest community is Jackson, Wyoming, and it's only about 20 minutes away. It's a renowned skiing, climbing. People go there for coming to the park, etc. It's a tourist destination. But what a lot of people don't know is that there is a large Latinx population here as well. About 25 to 30% of folks in the town are Latinx. And there's also a huge economic disparity between those folks and the tourists and the other residents. We also have the most millionaires per capita here in the county. So there's a huge economic disparity, and a lot of the folks who are Latinx tend to work in the service industry. Yes, and Kanye. So this program has been going on for about 10 years now, and when it first started, it came about because people recognized that even though we're only 20 minutes away from the town, there's a large Latinx population, we just weren't seeing them in the park. And I'm talking about we in the park in general, didn't understand why. And so what this program did was take a look at who that population was, why weren't they coming, what were those barriers, and how could they address the barriers with doing something like this. And so out of that assessment came out that there is the economic barrier. So we have, again, the economic disparity. Folks are working in the service industry. Oftentimes, multiple people in the home are working to provide income, including the high schoolers. And then the cultural aspect of like, I don't really know. Brown people don't do that. Also, the language barrier and trust. So for someone, normally when I'm working, I'm wearing this like really intense uniform that if you're undocumented could be intimidating and looking a lot like a law enforcement uniform. So breaking that trust, and then resources to be able to, even though we are only 20 minutes away from the community, a lot of us don't live in the community, and so we don't have that direct connection, so we have to work with folks. So looking at those barriers, we created this program called Pura Vida, which is a high school and middle school program. Specifically, I want to point out the high school program, which takes place over spring break. And we worked with the high school to recruit the youth, but we weren't getting a lot of participation. And again, it was those 4 barriers that were addressed. During that spring break, those high schoolers are working jobs in the service industry where they get paid $20 to $25 an hour at a t-shirt shop, which is what I get paid to do my job. And they're also like building that trust with the parents, like, hey, like, can we bring your kids out into the park? And they're like, what, who are you? The resources, even if we wanted, if we could and had that interest, the folks can't come out into they don't have cars, they don't have a way to come into the park. So really understanding our audience was what led to being able to address those barriers. So that program, the high schoolers, it's there for a week. We now pay them to participate. We sell it as a college resume experience. So the leadership skills, communication skills, team building skills that they can transfer on. And part of that payment is also that they learn about the park and the resource. And at the end, they have to create something. For the trust, we brought in we brought in family members and friends. So at the end of the program, the students are putting on the thing that they create, whether it's changed throughout the years. So like an art exhibit for their families, or they do a wildlife tour for their families and friends. So it's building that trust within the community, not only to show them what the kids are doing, but also to like bring them out into the park by extension. And then the culture, so this is a Latinx only program, so all the students are Latinx, and then some of the instructors in years past have also been Latinx. So you have that culture barrier addressed there, and like being able to communicate with the parents and let them know. And yeah, so this program has transformed. Now we have a lot of interest. It's also accelerated encourage other programs within the community to take place that are similar. And then now we also have a spin-off of it to take those same kids that are going through this program and put them into another program, or recruit for them for this other program. So I said a lot, but I think what has made this program a success is understanding the barriers, understanding your community, and then being able to address those, not just by yourself, but with the help of community members and folks who really understand the audience that you're trying to help.
Well, thank you for that. That was a great example. And I think that helps to answer some of the questions in the chat from Ashley and Blanca. And maybe Chantel, you can round that out. And then for the other 3 of you, would love to, I'll turn to you next. But Chantel, maybe you could share an example of a program, and also just kind of close out by saying what really gives you hope, what gives you the courage to continue this work where you are.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. I think for just really focusing, looking at what we're doing with our urban program, the reason why it's been able to be so successful is because we really defined the ways in which we work within the urban program, and we've defined these key elements. And if everyone's interested in it, I can share them with you. But they are, being community focused, being intentional in who we work with, being inclusive in who we serve, and making sure that the work that we're doing is collaborative. Whereas in the past, I don't think that we've always worked with the public that way. And so we've defined these, and those are the guiding principles in the way that we run the urban program. And that has helped us be so successful in engaging urban communities in the outdoors through partnerships and collaboration. And I can share more about that if somebody wants, just reach out. I think what gives me hope is, people like Julie, young in their career, moving the envelope and pushing someone like me to do more. And then just conversations like this, that there's so many people who see the need to do this kind of work, and the work is hard and it's challenging at times, but it does, take a lot of people to make change. And the more people pushing that change, the more likely it's going to happen. And so that's what gives me hope. It's conversations like these, the change in the Fish and Wildlife Service as a whole, and just, having somebody to call at times and say, hey, here's something that I need to do to have a hard conversation, help me out with it, is really what gives me hope to continue to do the work.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, the power in finding support and community in one another. Super important. Thank you so much for that, Chantel and Julie, for those examples. And there are others in the chat that people are sharing. I love it. That's great. And so just to turn over to Ben and Courtney and Rachel, if you could just share, what keeps you going in this work, what gives you hope and courage, and then what's up next? What can, folks be a part of in 2022? And feel free to answer actually one of those questions or both briefly before we close this part of our session and go into the next one.
Sure, I'll start, and part of it is also in answer to Ashley's question that she put in the chat too. But one thing that really gives me hope is like the energy of our youth participants and their drive really to want to share these experiences with others, and to drive us to improve and to have a bigger impact. So you're really like, they are a big part of our community voice, and I think it's our responsibility to be incredibly responsive to that voice. And one example is, during the pandemic, a lot of our leadership program participants shared that, they were all of a sudden responsible for taking care of younger brothers and sisters in ways that maybe they hadn't in the past. And in order to participate, they needed to be able to bring them along with them when they came to our program. And so all of a sudden we created a family engagement program that then we were able to see the impact of that and really expand through kind of some key funder help. So now we have like a Baltiskyy family fishing program that really engages oftentimes like 3 generations in the same program. And I think that's just one example. And that's an example that, not only should nonprofits, but I think government agencies should have that same responsiveness of really listening to your participants and to the community about, the work that you can do and what you can do to leverage the resources that you have, to support what needs to happen in the community.
Thank you so much for that, Ben. That really powerful. Again, lots of really specific examples that we hope that people will follow up with one another as well to learn more. And Courtney and Rachel.
I'll just give a plug really quick. A number of folks on this call are a part of the Thrive Outside initiative, when the San Diego Foundation is a backbone to a collective impact effort. It's been operating a number of years, but plans for an authentic collective impact were stymied by the pandemic. But one scope of collaboration that we're really trying to jumpstart for 2022 is our advocacy subcommittee, which is open to all partners across San Diego County. But we're going to do a convening at the end of January for folks to be a part of that committee or engage as their interest and bandwidth allows. So if you are interested in being a part of those conversations and Thrive Outside advocacy, feel free to put your information in the chat. And I know Heather Rossetti with the foundation is here. She's happy to add you to the listserv.
Thanks for that, Courtney. And I will say that there is a Thrive Outside network nationally as well. So if you just Google Thrive Outside, it's something that was launched by the Outdoor Foundation. Rachel.
All right. Well, I guess what I would say, what really gives me hope is just this incredible moment that we're in. I mean, I don't think that we're going to go back to a time where it's okay for half the population of California to not see its, premier park system as for them. And so I think, there's just so much forward momentum happening at the state level, the Resources Agency and the Outdoors for All initiative, and, the Parks, Department of Parks and Recreation have really embraced the idea of inclusion and action, inclusion and access. And I just don't see us going back. But it's incumbent on organization leaders like me and Ben and others to continue to make sure that voices throughout California are heard, that we are centering communities that have historically not seen parks as being for them, and really continuing to make that case that these places add to the quality of life of every Californian in such just so many ways, from health and wellness to building belonging and inclusion and community to being economic engines for communities, all of the above. So, there's a lot of work to do, but I think we're in this moment with a lot of momentum, and that's exciting to me.
Well, thank you all. What a rich conversation. And we just really appreciate the work that all of you are doing to really advance positive change in the world and in our parks and in the great outdoors. And, it's by building our own awareness, no matter what age we are, no matter what our background, our own experiences, how we identify, there's something that all of us can do. And it's a lifelong journey of learning. And also really shifting our attitude individually and collectively to really move toward values-based action. And every single one of us can make a difference. And so thank you again. We really appreciate your sharing your insights. And we're going to change a little bit the program that I told you, and we're going to actually move right over to our very own Dr. Zachary Green. And then we'll move into the evaluation portion before we get to our final section. So I would like to welcome my amazing and wonderful colleague, Zachary Green.
Hello, and thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Emily. And thank you, Ben, Chantel, Courtney, Rachel, and Julie, because you are actually a wonderful lead into where we want to go. Because this is about the change, indeed, the secret change agents that all of us are. And so this is an opportunity to really begin to lean into what it means to be transformational leaders in this space. And as we close this series, I'm going to offer you a way to begin to think about that. And then indeed in the chat, what you will see is a series of questions that I would want you to begin to be thinking about right now. What have I learned in the course of these seminars, whether this is the first one you just caught the last 5 minutes, or whether you've been here the entire time? What has inspired me? What has invited me to action? And indeed, what gives me hope? And at the end of this brief presentation I'm going to do, I would ask you to really begin to populate the chat with your responses to that. And if you have that answer now, you can begin to do it now, but I'm going to do the professor thing because I'm a professor. And so therefore we have to, hear me pontificate for a moment or two. And so I want to give you a sense of a number of your colleagues who are a part of a fellows group. And let me give you a picture of the way that we did this journey. But we're going to do the 10-minute version of that journey right now with each other. So if Michelle, we can do that. So what we began to do is to work with the equity framework of the Green Lining Institute. And what I would ask you to think about is, where do I begin in terms of this? Where you are right now. Are you have a process where you've embedded equity into your mission, vision, and values? Have you built equity into the processes of your projects and your planning and your delivery? Are you then making sure that in all of that, that you're ensuring equity outcomes? And then are you measuring it? So just ask yourself, secret change agents, where are you in this part of the framework right now? Where are you? Okay, now let's do the next part. The next part, then, it really centers around an inquiry. And so this is the one we worked with your colleagues, but you can take out the peers, presenters, and staff and say, in what ways might we leverage relationships and connections? And what our speakers just offered us is that these things are not done alone. They're done in concert with other people, so that we leverage relationships and connections to develop collaborative projects that advance equity in the outdoors. So I ask you to think, who are the people with whom I can work to make these things happen? Now let's take it to the next step. Now, when we have these things going on, we have to have norms around it. We have to have a way of having the conversation. Your colleagues develop these guiding lights of empathy in the listening, of not weaponizing how we're talking to each other, of genuine interest with one another, and that there's a real benefit from this because these conversations can be contentious, difficult, and polarizing. So in order to develop the collaboration, in order to move towards transformation, often we need to begin with conversations about how we're going to move things forward with compassion, patience, with trust and openness, with mutuality and understanding, so that we build a sense of community. Now let's take it to the next part. We would love to think that this is just a nice process, but in reality, in order to do leadership equity action projects, in other words, in order to do this, what we have done in the course of these webinars is maybe just the beginning. And so now it's about doing something about it. Now it's about propelling it to the next level. So let's talk about how we do that, or maybe how we talk about it. What we did in terms of working with your colleagues is there were a number of things that had to all happen at the same time to just move something forward. Look at this. Have you ever done an audit of like where you are in terms of equity? Do you have any statement around equity, even for yourself as like a personal mission or with a larger organizational context? Do you have anything that you're measuring that would suggest that you're moving from this point to that point? Do you have a baseline of data on that? What is your most important leverage point? Where can you begin to take action? Are there small things that you can do right now? And can you do this iteratively, recognizing that you're going to constantly be learning? And then what is it in terms of the long term? So I would ask you, secret change agents, which one of these are you ready to address if you haven't done so already? And I'll leave this up for another 10 seconds. Oh, wow, that's a lot to deal with. Oh, okay. I can do one of those. Yes, you can. Okay, now, next part. So there are all of these theory things, you know, I'm a professor, but the most important thing is that in terms of equity leadership, there's this notion of eco-leadership, which is really about the interconnectivity, about really finding how people can have their own sense of belonging to this, so that there's a spirit underneath this that we're trying to cultivate that is emancipatory, that's adaptive, that transforms. And then to borrow from the work of Ansel Dua, to really find this sort of borderland where the inner journey is as important as anything else, so that we borrow, as we have talked about a number of times in this process, from indigenous knowing, Okay, now let's go to the next part. So what we have learned in this is that it isn't a linear process. We would love to tell you that it's a linear process, but it's not. It's one where we've had to do inner work that is built into an outer context. And so that helps us connect to a sense of the purpose of this, not just something that we can do, but we have to have a deep connection to it. Otherwise, it may simply be for performative purposes so that it looks good. It requires us to move beyond the binary. We usually try to think about these things as complex, but sometimes we fall into simple binaries of either or, yes, no, black, white, right, wrong. So the journey invites us to a bigger picture of that. The next part is what we call an iterative adaptation, which is a fancy way of we fail until we get this right, and we learn from those failures so that we can go forward towards greater creation. And then if we do not expect resistance and regression, we're being unrealistic. Anytime we do this, this is going to be more of an OODA loop as opposed to a linear process. And so it is going to be, as I said, non-linear. And the resistance and the regression are the place where perseverance will be required. And then the challenging part of this is that we have this great circle of things that we're concerned about, but where can we focus so that we can have aspiration for adaptation to take action? In other words, how do we narrow it enough so that within our circle of influence, we can really bring about change? And then from that, we have the emergent equity reality. These are the seeds of the new now. So I ask you to look at these 6 spaces and places and look at a place or space where you are able to work, where you may have a bit of a challenge, or where it may be your strength and you can work well, excuse me, within that space. Now, a little bit more, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. So how do we become the seed? There's a wonderful thing that was in my Zen calendar yesterday or the day before, and it said, I need this for this presentation. The seed does not see the blossom. So how do we become the seed? In other words, what may be the impediments to the process of bringing outdoor equity to public spaces? What are the ways that we readily can find that first step? What is it that I can do from my role right now to begin to transform? Indeed, where can you become the seed? And yes, Daniel, it does. That seed becomes the blossom and it makes new seeds. So with all of that, how do you become the seed? And so what I'm inviting you to do in the chat, to remind you the questions again, is that there was indeed something that you learned, something that inspired you to action, something that gives you hope that has come from this. And I ask that each of you just take a moment to place it in the chat, and so that we can see the variety of ways that you are ready to continue this equity journey and bring about transformation in the space of our outdoors. So add what you will to the chat. Let's see where it goes. Thank you, Angela. I am the seed. And the blossom makes the seed. And then what else do we have? Anything that you've learned inspired you. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. That's wonderful. Thank you. Courage and solidarity. Wonderful. Compassionate agitation. I love that language. There's always more I can do. The series has inspired me to make changes where I can, even if they are small actions, eventually leads to a larger impact. indeed that we're not alone. Change, it takes time, and we're not doing this work for us, but for the future generations, focusing on what I can do in my role and take those first steps to make the insurmountable seem possible. Knowing that others are working towards this effort is inspiring, and sharing with this network is meaningful to me. I have learned that there are many different ways to collaborate and move forward. All right, let's continue to populate the chat. And then a couple of you have written some things that I would really love to hear how you would amplify them. And you know, you can use the hands up function, and then this is your opportunity to speak to it as well. I gave you a picture of that. But for example, like Nicole, if you would like to speak, or Ashley, or Lauren, you know, if you could just put your hands up and just sort of speak into it more so that we can also add some voices to this as well. Okay, so if you would like to, just let us know, open your mic, hands up, and speak to it. Who'd like to do that? So okay, so let me share. Okay, so part of taking action is small steps like this, and your voices then would then speak on behalf of others, and then provide an opportunity for all of us to learn. Okay, Daniel, thank you so much. Open your mic. Go ahead.
Hey, howdy.
Hi.
So yeah, thank you all for putting this on. This is so on the gives me hope and inspiration. You know, these meetings, just in my organization, where at my specific office, you know, I'm the only education and outreach person. So just, you know, getting to see other folks that sort of are on the same page, that are getting it, that are doing work, that are like learning and implementing. It's like, oh yeah, like I'm not alone, you know, it's really nice. And seeing how it's working in places, you know, it's like, I feel like a few years ago, it's like, oh, like this is coming, you know, like equity and education and the outdoors, like this is all, you know, sort of like that gradualism, like it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And I feel like when I'm here listening to these examples, it's like, it's here, you know, and it's happening. And, you know, now other folks are sort of like getting caught up in that wave. You know, seeing how leadership in different places and how people are communicating with leadership, and they're kind of understanding some of the science behind education and the impacts and benefits, you know, and broadening their values or their definitions of, you know, what success looks like, and what goals they're meeting, and who they're meeting those goals with. That stuff all gives me hope and inspiration and invites me to action. You know, it's like, I better catch up, you know what I mean? Even if I think I'm doing good stuff, or I'm, you know, it's like, there's so much more. We can just keep kicking butt, you know? So, and yeah, on the seed thing though, I really like that. Like, I mean, we're environmental educators, so I think we all love examples with nature. And I mean, I feel like we could take that metaphor and run with it for a whole webinar, you know?
I
thinking
know.
about the soil and the water,
The
and the sun,
soil,
and all the partners you need. And yeah, and I really like that, because I think a lot of the feedback that I get from folks is like my enthusiasm, my curiosity. Like, you know, when I see a flower on a hike with students, like I really get stoked, and I'm like, whoa, like, and I feel like that's my flower, you know, like that like attracts, you know, the people I work with, or attracts the students and helps me plant those seeds. And I think all of us, just like there's a diverse amount of flowers out there that attract things with different strategies, you know, not every flower is super colorful or, you know, has a lot of petals, or but they're all fascinating. So I think if we think of ourselves like that, like, you know, what is that part of you? Like, how can you be that flower? Like, you know, and it doesn't have to look like a daisy or a rose, you know, it needs to look like, you know, the Zachary green flower. And yeah, it'll work out. So yeah, thank you guys.
Angela, I see you opened your camera, so go on, Angela. Yeah, you can open your mic, Angela. Go ahead. So I'll start reading yours until your mic is open. It says, in our work, they say that stability begins with a stable home. It is my hope that we can build beyond stability and open our residents to life and nature that enriches their life and grow beyond the day today. Am I hearing you correctly, Angela? You can just sort of nod. Oh, there you go. Okay, speak to it. Yeah, no, you opened it. Go ahead again. No, it's back on mute. There you are. Go. No, it went back on mute again. And that's back on mute again. Now.
My
Oh,
connection
yeah,
is really
there we go.
poor. Can you hear me clearly?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, because I hear you guys clearly. Okay. So I'm with Community Housing Works. I'm a board member here. So this is my first of these series. I'm so blessed to be here with you all because it has been a passion project of mine to open up community members to more outdoor experiences. I was first introduced to nature programs with Children in Nature Network, and have worked with the Fish and Wildlife before. I recognized until actually from going down to San Diego, so that's nice to see you guys. But our community members, they're and once they reach our communities, they are stabilized with a living environment that's affordable. But I look at them and I know that they are now sequestered inside these, four walls. And especially with COVID, our youth have, been homeschooled here. They were in neighborhoods that sometimes aren't always the most accessible for outdoor play and activities and safety. And when it comes to enrichment in national parks or our wildlife areas that are here, they usually only get that exposure through school programs and not through communal activities. And I just feel like I am in a position to create change, to increase quality in our youth, to introduce them and their families. A lot of us are Latin here in San Diego as well. So I was being in Teton programs, and we have access to these estuaries and areas. They don't have to be large expeditions. They can be completely accessible to everyone in our community. And so I just you connect with me because I'm a worker and I will help you move your needle forward. And please help me introduce this because it will be a hard lift. We're already doing work in the housing area, but housing, stability, and lifestyle is a holistic experience. And we need, even in our playgrounds, in our communities, we need to introduce more nature and to nurture our communities. So thank you.
And we'll do one more. Lauren F., you talked about power advocacy through representation. Can you amplify that a little bit for us, please, if you're still here? Lauren? That's too bad. I run a note. That's yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, please. What does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually kind of inspired by Julie. I had written it down. She said, as a change agent, you have power and advocacy through representation. And as a past government employee, I know I felt that too, where you feel like you want to do more, but I think it's important to keep in mind that you have your own power just with who you are. And yeah, so I know it's like always hard sometimes to be able to do a lot, but you can bring so much with just your own experiences and stories that you can tell growing up like with your own family and your own background and culture. So I thought that was just really insightful that she shared that.
Thank you all so much. And so you will see that Les has put into the chat that now is that time when we're going to say goodbye, but say hello, because this is your opportunity to really just give us some sense of how this has worked for you. Because as we go forward and provide these opportunities in the future, we want to have a sense of what has inspired you, what's given you hope, but also places where we can do it a little bit better. And that comes from you. So with that, we want to close with what, Hannah, I think you were the last word here. This series has inspired me to continue pushing for change at our organization. Sometimes we're hesitant to take action for fear of being wrong or not doing it right. I like the idea. Let's see, I got caught off in the middle of it. I like the idea of iterative process. We're going to make mistakes, and it takes lots of attempts before our program flourishes, like the programs that we learned about here. So let's continue to flourish together, and I'll turn it over to Les and Emily.
Excellent. I think Michelle, and thank you so much, Dr. Green, for leading us in that and really kind of bringing this program back to back around full circle. I wanted to kind of point everyone's direction to the link that Michelle shared in the chat box. This series has been a work of passion, a work of love for our phenomenal planning team, including Emily, Michelle, Chantel, Dr. Green, and so many others that have really worked to bring this about. Julie in the early stages of this launch as well. And so we're looking to bring this program forward again in the future, and would love to gather your input through this survey to help us to improve, to reflect on what has worked, what hasn't worked. And then we also have some additional questions in the survey as well for those that have specifically also been a part of the leadership cohort that has been meeting after each one of these sessions as well. So if you would, please take some time to complete this survey. We'll have some great music also that will play, and then we'll come back on, and the planning team will wrap up. Michelle, any additional directions there?
Nope, just fill out the survey, please, and we'll come back in about 8 minutes, 5 of. Thank you, everyone. If you still need more time to fill out the survey, we highly encourage you to do that. And I will send a link out to everyone through the Eventbrite in case you lost the link that I sent in the chat earlier. All right, so with that, I'm just going to give a few parting words, a lot of thank yous. It's definitely bittersweet. It's been amazing helping Les, Chantel, Emily, and Zachary put on this series for all of you. It's been a wonderful experience for me and meeting like-minded fellows like all the participants. So thank you, Les, Chantel, Zachary, and Emily, and all our featured speakers. Thank you for your relentless effort, your thoughtfulness, your leadership to make this series an empowering learning tool to cultivate greater outdoor equity. A huge thank you to all of you, those that participated, whether it was just one webinar or the entire series. I truly thank you for your interest and action in making our world a more equitable and just place, especially in times where sometimes hope and good news can feel few and far between. I hope, like myself, that you left every session feeling optimistic and confident, learning new ways and knowing all the ways in which you can personally invoke and improve outdoor equity, whether through your work, communities, or networks. As mentioned before, change starts frustratingly slow and sometimes small, but it's that hard work that is the most rewarding. I hope too, like myself, that you find motivation by knowing that with each generation, we will achieve and have a higher standard of equity. As we all continue with our careers, let's use the knowledge we learned from these series to build momentum for outdoor equity. It has been an absolute honor working and learning with all of you. And with that, I thank you again and hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and continuing making the world a better place.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Michelle. And with that, thank you all again. And we hope to see you soon. We hope to stay in touch. Thanks, y'all.